Hey everybody, welcome to episode 129 of the AskDap show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about single mass versus dual mass flywheels, Audi 3.0T issues, and finding things in your oil pan.
Adrian via Facebook asks, what is your take on converting from a dual mass flywheel to a single mass flywheel when you upgrade the clutch?
Okay, so Adrian, converting a dual mass flywheel car to single mass, or which one would I go with? So this question was asked on our video that we did, the In the Shop, talking about TTRS clutches. That was done on a Mark 6, but it's also common on Mark 7s. So here's my personal take on TTRS, or a dual mass and single versus single mass. So if you are looking to maintain the stock feel, dual mass is going to be a better option. The important thing you need to understand is a couple of things. One, dual mass flywheels are not cheap. They also cannot be refinished easily. I know there are some people, probably someone's going to comment and say that there are people out there who refinish them. They do. They are not common and they're not cheap either. So it's oftentimes going to be more cost effective to just replace your flywheel, which is usually going to be about $500 or $600. When you go with a single mass, the downsides is that they make noise. They make quite a bit of noise, and they are going to hold up better to track use and things like that. So if you are really hard on your car, you're going to be tracking your car, you're going to be doing all kinds of stuff like that, or you just launch a lot or whatever. If you are one of those people, you might kill your dual mass flywheel, and dual mass won't do you any good as far as keeping the factory feel, because you've destroyed it and all the guts of it are all messed up because they're just been taking a beating over and over and over again. If you're that kind of person, single mass is your best bet, but you have to understand of what the sacrifices are. So if anybody not familiar, single mass flywheels, when you switch from a dual mass to a single mass, you get like kind of this knocking noise under certain conditions, especially amplified if you go next to a wall or something like that. You're going through a drive-through, or you're under a bridge, or anytime you're near a wall, it's going to kind of reverberate off of there, and it's like a knocking noise. Almost it sounds like a diesel. So for some people, it's going to drive them nuts. Others, they won't care. And so that's kind of my take. I think either one is a fine choice. You just have to be aware of when you get rid of that dual mass flywheel, there are some sacrifices, most notably noise, that you're going to be getting from that circumstance.
Alex via Facebook asks, anyone have an idea of what this noise is on my BAS4? Not the ticking, but the almost thumping sound.
Okay, so this guy posted a clip on Facebook about the engine noise he was having, and so let's take a look at that. Okay, so when you hear that, he's saying not the ticking noise, but the thumping noise. So the ticking noise is probably going to be somewhere between injectors and then maybe an 80 valve, just normal valve train noise that you would hear on pretty much all Volkswagen and Audi current model engines. The thumping noise that he's talking about, to me, I'm almost sure of it, is an exhaust leak. And so what I actually told him on this post was, if you cover your exhaust tips, or really you're going to need a friend to do that in this car, because it's an S4 like this one, you're going to have dual exhaust. Take like rags or something like that, cover both of the exhaust tips, and then listen under the hood. If you hear the noise kind of amplify, you know you have an exhaust leak, and you can address it there. Now, he happened to have upgraded downpipes that were installed a couple months ago. And like anytime you modify a car, I would always look at the work that's been done. Things loosen up over time. You may have missed something along in the install. So, and actually he later on did update this and said that I think there was a bolt loose or something along one of the downpipe bolts was loose, and it was indeed an exhaust leak. So that's going to be the best way to find an exhaust leak always, is just cover the exhaust tips. It's going to push that back pressure back to the engine. And if you have an exhaust leak, it's going to all push that pressure out wherever the leak is. So that's always the easiest way to find an exhaust leak. And whenever you do have an exhaust leak, you'll usually find things like white and kind of soot marks that look wet coming out of the exhaust on specific points. So that's usually the best way to find an exhaust leak. You can see that there's kind of remnants of where that leak would be.
Austin via Audi asks, I have some bad news about my B&a half S4. Due to an over rev from missing a shift, I am believed to have bent valves. Compression test was completed and all cylinders other than the two test with 180 and the other 0. I drove the car home after the incident. It didn't run well, but it ran enough to get me home. Anyone have experience with bending valves in these engines, or is there any other useful knowledge? Shop quoted me 10 hours to remove and replace heads.
Okay, so this was a thread on AudiZine that I saw that I thought was kind of good, because there's a bunch of people jumping into this saying that they didn't think that could bend valves. So I actually did a video a long time ago about this that was called how something about money shifting. It's a phrase that's used in a bunch of different places, but essentially money shifting is when you do also what's called a mechanical over rev. You go to shift and you miss a shift and you go into the wrong gear, whereas you would go maybe 3-4, you end up going 3-2, you let out the clutch, it over revs, and what you end up getting is what's called valve float. So valve float happens as your valves are opening and closing as your engine speed goes. If your RPMs go too high because you have a manual and you basically locked it in to the over rev by itself, it has nothing to do with the gear or your throttle position. It has to do with the mechanical match between the transmission and your speed. So when you do that as a mechanical over rev, it's going to go to, let's say, 10,000 RPM, red line's at 7,000 RPM, just hypotheticals, and your valves, actually valve springs, are not strong enough to keep the valves shut. So that's why you have to upgrade your valve springs if you want an engine to rev higher. So the valve hangs open longer than it should, causing the piston to contact on its way up, because again, it's not pulling back fast enough, and you end up bending the valve. So that's how you end up having an issue with mechanical over rev, or in his circumstance, obviously bending valves. It's very likely you did bend valves. I'm actually shocked. 10 hours to remove and replace heads seems kind of low to me for S4. I don't know. I'll try to see if we can take a look at what book time should be on that. Seems low, but certainly the only way to know is to pull the heads off and inspect them. But if you tested low compression on a bunch of cylinders, you can be almost sure that you've bent valves. And unfortunately, it's a terrible situation, but the only way to replace that would be to replace the valves. Most likely, most Volkswagen and Audi engines don't do bottom end damage. They'll just bend the valves and that'll be it. So once you get the heads replaced, or specifically the bent valves, and get the heads machined, you should be fine. Roll it, put it back together, and you should be all set.
Hayden via Facebook asked, need help. Was replacing my oil pan and found this broken off. What is it and how screwed am I? Okay,
so this question was in a Facebook group. I saw it posted and I thought this was important to note. So this is a picture of an oil pan. He busted his oil pan driving down the road, and he went to replace his oil pan. We have a DIY that we shot on. I'm sure he was using that. And he had an issue where he found some other damage. Now, this is really, to me, this was kind of a concern, and some other people expressed this, and I think it's really important to understand that if you open your engine in this circumstance and you find that, which is actually the oil pump pickup that's broken off, my number one concern is that there's potentially more damage than you are capable of identifying, because you may not be that experienced. If you open up an engine and see damage that you don't know what you're looking at, in my opinion, you should always get a second opinion as to what's going on. So you should actually take it to a shop, let them look at it, determine if there's any additional damage, because it's possible that, you could say, oh, hey, that's an oil pump pickup. You call us, we sell you an oil pump pickup and the seal for it, as well as an oil pan, blah, 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 all that stuff. You get it in, well, maybe the oil pump is cracked and you have no oil pressure, and you end up nuking your engine because you have no oil pressure and you just continue to drive until the engine blows up. That is a very likely scenario, that something that is very plausible if you were to have this type of problem. So anytime you have an impact like that and you have damage, if you don't have any additional damage when you bust an oil pan, no problem, just replace the pan and move on. This damage was clearly significant enough that you needed to replace the oil pump pickup. If that's the case, I would always, if you're not sure what you're looking at, have a shop look at it, because otherwise you could have a serious problem on your hands.
Paradesi via YouTube asks, can a bad PCV valve cause low oil pressure problems?
Okay, so PCV valves control the crankcase pressure in the bottom end of the engine, or really in the engine in general. that is not related to oil pressure directly. So if you have low oil pressure, you shouldn't be replacing your PCV valve in an effort to address a low oil pressure issue. Anytime you have low oil pressure, the first thing you should do, absolutely an oil light. First process is you have an oil light, make sure you have oil in the car. Next process is if your oil light is still on, first of all, don't run the engine. Second of all, do an oil pressure test with an oil pressure gauge to determine if you have low oil pressure. That is super important. From my experience, most people tend to do this thing where they get a low oil pressure light, they might check the oil, then their next step is to try to replace the oil pressure switch, which is a backwards way to do it because you may end up running the engine on a car that has low oil pressure, which again will nuke the engine, as we just covered in our last question. If you have low oil pressure for long enough, you'll nuke your engine. You have to replace it. It's going to be way too expensive. And potentially you could have gone from maybe just replacing the oil pump to now you have to replace an engine. So always assume that a low oil pressure light could potentially be related to an oil pump or something like that. Always check to see if you indeed do have low oil pressure once you've passed the point that you know you have oil. And then you can go from there to determine if that's the case. PCV valves are going to have relation to the oil system, as in like for TSI cars, a bad PCV valve causes the rear main to blow out after a while, and that could cause a rear main leak, but that's not an oil pressure related thing. That's hopefully that will address your issue and make sure that you get your oil pressure issue fixed, because that should be priority number one. Thank you so much for watching episode 129 of the AskDap Show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.